Hey guys, welcome back to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. Today, I want to tell you about the classics I want to read in 2020. If you follow my channel, you'd know that I mostly read contemporary literary fiction, including some new releases now and then. But I also read classics from time to time. So far this year, I've been focusing more on contemporary novels, but I've recently decided to plan out the classics that I want to read between now and the end of 2020. Let's just see how many of them I manage to read. Just to be clear, by classic I mean any work of fiction published before the mid-20th century. So on rough chronological order, here are the classics I want to read in 2020. I've been getting a lot of new subscribers lately, hi, so depending on how long you've been around, you may or may not be aware that last year I read the first Homeric epic, the Iliad, and to my surprise, I dug it. I liked it so much that I even included it as one of my favorite reads of 2019. So it makes sense to me to read the second epic attributed to Homer, the Odyssey. Now, my interest in reading the Odyssey is the same that moved me to tackle the Iliad. They are both important texts in the Western canon that continue to be referenced in the work of many authors. I want to understand all those literary references and I want to read all those retellings and get it. And the best way I've found to do that is by reading these two classics. Now, the Odyssey is a long poem focusing on the journey home by Odysseus, king of Ithaca, after the Trojan War. Odysseus has spent 10 years fighting, and the journey back to Ithaca takes him a further 10 years. It is believed that the Odyssey was composed near the end of the 8th century BC. I have this gorgeous penguin edition, translated by Robert Fagles, who is also the translator of the version of the Iliad that I read last year. Now, the next classic I have is a lot more accessible. Last year, I planned to read Vanity Fair by the English writer William Thackeray for Victober. In case you don't know, Victober is a month-long readathon of Victorian writing that takes place in October. My Victober TBR was way over-ambitious because it also included Middlemarch. I ended up prioritizing Middlemarch and never got to Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair originally came out in serial form between 1847 and 1848 and then as a single volume. The title comes from the 17th century Christian allegory, The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. Vanity is the name of a town whose inhabitants are overly attached to worldly goods. That's in Pilgrim's Progress, right? And let me make an aside to recommend The Pilgrim's Progress. Okay, going back to Vanity Fair, the novel, it has been intriguingly subtitled Novel Without Hero, which indicates to me that Thackeray wanted to break with the literary hero tradition that was prevalent at the time. When I think of Vanity Fair, like most people, I think of the character of Becky Sharp, who I believe is the anti-hero or anti-heroine of this novel. I think Vanity Fair is long overdue for me, so I look forward to correcting that this year. Another classic novel that I feel I should have read by now is Moby Dick by the American writer Herman Melville. I actually tried to read this novel, originally published in 1851, a few years ago. I remember enjoying the first few chapters, but I cannot remember why I stopped reading it. Moby Dick or The Whale is one of the most famous American literary classics. Sailor Ishmael is the narrator who tells us Captain Ahab's quest for revenge on the giant white sperm whale that everybody calls Moby Dick. I doubt that I'll have anything original to say about this novel, which is always a risk when discussing classics that most people have heard about, but we will see. My classics are largely going to be focused on the English language, on English language literature, which will come as no surprise to anybody who watches my videos. But there will be a few books from other literary traditions, such as The Red and the Black by French writer Stendhal. This novel was first published in 1830, and what attracts me to it is its main character, Julien Sorel, an ambitious social climber. I understand that The Red and the Black is a social satire, and I'm here for it. I'm going to try to read it in French and see how I get along. If that proves too challenging for me, I can always lean back on an English or a Spanish translation. I don't think I'll struggle with the language of The Moonstone by the English writer Wilkie Collins, first published in 1868. It is considered the first detective novel ever written. Now, I don't generally read detective fiction, but I've heard enough good things about The Moonstone to make me want to read it. As with many novels of its time, The Moonstone first came out in serialized form. In this case, its chapters were published independently in a magazine called All Year Round, which was owned by a writer you might have heard about, someone called, I think, Charles Dickens. Another 19th century classic that I'd like to read in 2020 is Little Women by the American writer Louisa May Alcott. Little Women was originally published in 2 volumes. The first one came out in 1868 and the second one in 1869. Like most people, I am familiar with the story and the characters thanks to the TV and movie adaptations of the novel. I haven't watched the latest movie adaptation directed by Greta Gerwig yet, but I've seen all the previous ones many times over. But my first contact, this is funny, my first contact with Little Women was a Japanese anime series from the 1980s that I watched as a child. I don't know if any of you have heard about it, but if you have watched it, I'd be curious to know when and how, okay, and what you remember about it. So why do I want to read Little Women? Well, I am attracted to coming-of-age stories, and I just think it's high time I read Little Women. The next book I have is a comic novel entitled 3 Men in a Boat by the English writer Jerome K. Jerome. Again, this is a novel I feel I should have read a long time ago. I know very little about it though. I know 2 things about it. I know that it was published in 1889, so we're getting close to the 20th century. And I know, or I've heard, that the humor in it has aged well. And with everything that is going on right now, I think all of us could do with some laughs. So I might prioritize 3 Men in a Boat and read it relatively soon. A book that I am not expecting to get any laughs from is Jude the Obscure by the English writer Thomas Hardy. I've actually already read it. It was published in 1895 and I read it so long ago, obviously not, I didn't read it in 1895, but it was so long ago that I think it deserves a reread. I do remember enjoying this novel, which is about a working class man who dreams of higher education. But that's not what the novel is about, but that's kind of what happens, right? Just to give you a quick idea. Jude the Obscure, when I first read it, spoke to me in many ways, and I wonder if it will have a similar effect on me if I read it again. Now, it occurs to me that not all the books, but most of the books that I'm talking about in this video have been adapted to other media, but very few of them have been as fertile in popular culture as Dracula. I mean, who is not familiar with the character Count Dracula? And yet, I've never read it. I've never read this novel by the Irish writer Bram Stoker that started it all. Now, I am not particularly interested in Gothic fiction or vampire fantasy narratives, nothing against it, but I'm not particularly interested in that. But when a work of fiction is as enduring and has inspired so many other writers and creators as this one, I feel like I must read it. Now, I understand that Dracula is an epistolary novel, and that means that the novel is told through a series of letters. I believe there are also fictional newspaper articles and diary entries thrown in. Generally, I am not crazy about epistolary novels, and let's just hope that the structure works here. Now, the next novel finally takes us to the 20th century. The Golden Bowl by the American writer Henry James was published in 1904. Some critics consider it the best novel by Henry James, and it is certainly one of his most widely read books. I have read at least 2 novels by Henry James before, Daisy Miller and The Portrait of a Lady, but I think that I was probably too young to appreciate them as they deserve. Now, James is an author I've been meaning to go back to, and I think 2020 may just be the right year for that. Another author I'd like to go back to is D.H. Lawrence, and I think that his novel The Rainbow might be the right book to reacquaint myself with his writing. I believe The Rainbow, which was published in 1915, deals with class conflict. But don't all English novels deal with class conflict anyway? The Rainbow has a sequel entitled Women in Love, which came out in 1920, so 5 years later. And if I enjoy The Rainbow, I'll get to Women in Love for sure soon after. An author I have never read and would like to change that about is William Somerset Maugham. Perhaps his most famous novel is Of Human Bondage, which first came out, I believe, in 1915. I know nothing about this novel. I haven't even watched any of its film adaptations, which kind of surprises me. But I think I'd like to keep it like that until I read it. The first classic, it's just like change gears now. So the first classic that I talked about in this video was the Odyssey. And I said that I wanted to read it to understand all the literary references to and retellings of it that later writers have made. And the most famous retelling of the Odyssey is Ulysses by the Irish writer James Joyce. Ulysses is the Latin version or the Roman version of the Greek name Odysseus, but James's Ulysses is a modern novel. In fact, it's a modernist novel as well, with a contemporary setting. After coming out as part of a series, it came out as a single volume in 1922. The action in Ulysses famously takes place in one day, June 16th, 1904, as its main character, Leopold Bloom, goes from appointment to appointment. Everybody knows that. Now, when I was younger, I heard once someone saying that readers need to be at least 40 before they read Ulysses. I really don't remember what the rationale behind that was. Perhaps it had something to do with the fact that James Joyce turned 40 on the day Ulysses was published in a single volume, which was February the 2nd, 1922. But maybe it has nothing to do with that. The point is that I didn't read it when I turned 40, and I think I'm ready to tackle it now. And another book that I feel ready to tackle is In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. The main challenge for me when it comes to this book is that In Search of Lost Time is divided into 7 volumes. The 7 volumes originally came out between 1871 and 1922. Now, I talked about this book as a suggestion for March of the Mammoths earlier this month, so you can go check it out. Check out that video when you're done with this one if you're interested. And I guess this is a good time for me to remind you that the best way for you not to miss out on any of my videos is to subscribe and activate the notifications bell. I put out a weekly video every Saturday, so that is easy enough to remember. But I also sometimes put out extra content during the week, and people don't tend to watch that as much. So I wonder if they're just not aware of it. But of course, you can always check out my channel page and watch any of my previous videos anyway, whenever you feel like it. Okay, I have only 2 more classics I want to read in 2020. The next one is A Passage to India by the English writer Ian Forster. I don't know why I haven't read this novel, which first came out in 1924 yet, because I just love everything I've ever read by Ian Forster. I actually think that Ian Forster may be one of my favorite writers, and I've been toying with the idea of rereading Howard's End and A Room with a View. He wasn't a very prolific novelist, so I have no excuse not to read all his books, right? But A Passage to India is going to come next. Now, 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of the death of Spanish writer Benito Pérez Galdós. Like me, he was born here in the Canary Islands, but he moved to Spain as a young man, and I believe that all his works are set in Spain. I've never read anything by Galdos, so I wasn't sure where to start. I have decided to read Fortunata and Jacinta, which critics have compared to the work of realist writers such as Balzac or Dickens. Now, that doesn't immediately sound appealing to me, I don't know about you, but I like to read it and find out for myself. Now, Fortunata and Jacinta was first published in Spanish in 1887, but like the rest of his novels, it's available in English translation, so you can get it if you're interested. Although, you know, I must say he's not very well known in the English-speaking world, and I don't know why. I am full of good intentions about Fortunata and Jacinta, but it is a long novel, so we'll see. So Do you think I'm being overambitious? I think that getting through these classics is doable as long as I plan my reading carefully and spread them out over the next few months. And, you know, if I cannot get to all of them in 2020, I'll carry them over to next year, 2021, who cares? I realize that some of these books are quite long, which is also an important factor to take into account. And I haven't even talked about Don Quixote by Cervantes, which I'm currently reading, and I didn't talk about it because I already did so on my Big Books TBR for March, but I'm still reading it, and I intend to finish it this year. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see how I get along with all of these books. In the meantime, please let me know if you have read any of the classics I discuss in this video, and if there are others that you should think, or that you think I should read, right? Or that you think you should read. As always, thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.